All right, today we're going to be in the Unit 5 packet titled Exponents and Exponential Functions, and we're going to be doing page 19. All right, in the previous lesson, we talked about simplifying radicals without variables. So now we're going to talk about specifically square roots and simplifying them with variables. So square roots with variables are also known as monomial square roots. Just like numbers, variables can be simplified. So if you're given square root of a to the m power, and m is a multiple of 2, then to simplify it, we just divide m by 2. All right, if it's not a multiple of 2, we have to break it apart, and I'll walk you through that when we get to an example. So, number 1, we have square root of x squared. So in order to simplify this, I take my exponent, which is a 2, and I divide it by 2, which is just 1. So that means my answer is x to the first power. The radical goes away, or the square root goes away, and we're just left with x to the first power. So number 2, square root of m to the 6th power. 6 is an even number, so I'm just going to take it, divide it by 2, and that's going to give me 3. So I drop the square root, and I get m to the 3rd power. All right, now we're going to look at some examples with numbers and variables. So number 3, we have square root of 9x squared. So what I do is I break it apart. I break the number up from the letter so everything has its own square root. This we can simplify in the calculator. So remember, you're going to do second x squared in the calculator, and that's going to give you the square root sign. And so when I do that, I get 3. Now to simplify k squared, I have to see if our exponent is divisible by 2. Our exponent is 2, which is divisible by 2. So I would do 2 divided by 2, and that would give me 1. So that would leave me with k to the 1st power. All right, number 4, square root of 64 p to the 4th. So again, we're going to break it up. I'm going to have square root of 64 and square root of p to the 4th. So I can simplify square root of 64 in my calculator. So if I type that in, I get 8. All right, and then square root of p to the 4th, I have to make sure my exponent is divisible by 2, which it is. So I would do 4 divided by 2, which gives me 2. So I'm left with p to the 2nd power. All right, number 5, we have square root of 100 x squared y squared. So this time, I'm going to break it up into 3 separate square roots. Everything gets its own square root. So this we can type in the calculator. So when I do that, I get 10. X has an exponent of 2, which is divisible by 2. So I'm going to do 2 divided by 2, and I get 1. Y also has an exponent of 2, so I'm going to do 2 divided by 2 and get 1. So this is my final answer. All right, number 6, square root 49a squared b to the 6th c to the 4th. So I'm going to break all that up. Square root of 49, square root of a squared, square root of b to the 6th, square root of c to the 4th. So this can be typed in my calculator. So when I type that in, I get 7. Square root of a squared, a is divisible by 2, so I do 2 divided by 2, and I get 1. B to the 6th, 6 is divided by 2, or is divisible by 2, so when I do 6 divided by 2, I get 3. Then 4 is divisible by 2, so when I do 4 divided by 2, I also get 2. All right, now we're going to look at some examples where there is an exponent that's not an even number. So, looking at number 7, square root of y to the 5th. So, if I do 5 divided by 2 in my calculator, I get a decimal, which I don't want. So, a way around that is we're going to break this apart into 2 separate radicals. All right, in my first one, okay, I'm going to take my exponent and subtract 1, which gives me 4. So in my first one, I'm going to have y to the 4th. And then the other one, I'm just going to have y. Because if I were to add up these y's, so I got 4 y's here and 1 y here, that gives me the 5 y's that we started with. So that's why we're able to do that. Now, square root of y to the 4th can be simplified because 4 is an even number. So I divide it by 2, and I get 2. And then this guy can't be simplified, so I just bring it down. So this is my final answer. All right, number 8, we have the square root of a squared and b to the 3rd. So I'm going to break it apart. A squared, b to the 3rd. All right, square root of a squared can be simplified because 2 is an even number. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. Now, square root of b to the 3rd cannot be simplified because 3 is an odd number. So I'm going to break it apart. In my first square root, I'm going to take my exponent and subtract 1, which gives me 2. And then in my second square root, I'm just going to have the letter 1, or the letter b. Now, square root of b squared can be simplified because it now has an exponent with an even number. So that simplifies to b1. And then we can't simplify the square root of b. Now I bring my a1 down, and this is my final answer. All right, let's look at number 9. So we have the square root of x squared, y to the 3rd, z to the 4th. So I'm going to break all this up. X squared, y to the 3rd, and z to the 4th. All right, square root of x squared can be simplified because 2 is an even number. So I do 2 divided by 2, and I get 1. Square root of y to the 3rd cannot be simplified, so I have to break it up. In my first square root, I take 1 less than our exponent, so 3 minus 1, which is 2. And then in my second one, I'm just going to have the letter y. And then square root of z to the 4th can be simplified because 4 is an even number, so 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now, the last thing I need to simplify is the square root of y squared because 2 is an even number. So I do 2 divided by 2, and I get 1. So, everything that's not under a square root, I'm going to write first. And then what is left under the radical, or the square root, I'm going to write last. All right, and you can put the 1s with those numbers if you want to, but you don't have to put the 1. All right, number 10, we have square root of 144k to the 3rd. So I'm going to break it up. Square root of 144, square root of k to the 3rd. So I can type square root of 144 in my calculator, and that gives me 12. So that's simplified. Square root of k to the 3rd cannot be simplified, so I need to break it apart. In my first square root, I'm going to take 1 less than the current exponent, so k squared. And then in my second one, I'm just going to have the letter K. This can't be simplified anymore, so I'm going to underline it. Then the square root of K squared can be simplified because 2 is an even number. So I do 2 divided by 2, and I get K1. Now that's simplified. So everything not under the radical or the square root, I'm going to put first. And then everything that's left under the square root, I'm going to write at the end. All right, number 11. We have the square root of 81 r to the 7th s to the 4th. So let's break it up. All right, square root of 81 we can type in our calculator. When I do that, I get 9. Square root of r to the 7th can't be simplified because 7 is an odd number. So I'm going to have to break it apart. So I'm going to have 2 square roots. In the first one, I'm going to take 1 less than the current exponent, so 7 minus 1, which is 6. And then in the second one, I'm just going to have the letter r. So this is simplified. You can't do anything with it. But I can simplify r to the 6th, okay, because 6 is an even number. So I divide it by 2, and I get 3. Then s to the 4th can be simplified because 4 is an even number. So I do 4 divided by 2, and I get 2. So everything that's underlined is going to be in our final answer. Everything not under a square root is going to come first. So 9r3s2. And then whatever is left under the radical, we're going to put at the end. All right, last one is number 12. We have the square root of 196 c to the 5th d to the 2nd. So I'm going to break it apart. Square root of 196 is 14. Square root of c to the 5th can't be simplified because c is an odd number. So I'm going to break it apart. Okay, I'm going to take 1 less than the current exponent, which is 4. And then in the other square root, I'm just going to have c. Square root of c is simplified, so I'm going to underline it. Square root of c to the 4th can be simplified one more time because 4 is an even number. So I do 4 divided by 2, and I get 2. Then lastly, square root of d to the 2nd power. That can be simplified because 2 is an even number. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that leaves me with just d to the 1st. So now, everything not under a square root is written first. And then everything still under the square root goes at the end. All right, so I want to do one more example with y'all because there's one thing that you are probably going to be confused about if you see it on a test or on a worksheet. So over on the side, I want you to write down this problem. All right, every time that we've done one, the number that we simplify always comes out to a whole number, but I want to look at an example where it's not a whole number. So this is actually number 9 on page 20. All right, so the first thing we have to do here is break it all up. So square root of 24, square root of a squared, square root of b to the 4th. All right, so I'm going to take the square root of 24, and that gives me 2 square root 6. I take the square root of a squared, so it's an even number, so I divide it by 2, and I get a 1. And then square root of b to the 4th, I take the exponent of 4 divided by 2, and I get 2. All right, so 2a and b squared are not under a square root, so they're going to come first. And then our square root of 6 is going to come at the end. All right, let's actually do one more example because that one didn't have what I was looking for. So now we're going to do number 13 on page 20. All right, so we got to break it all up. So square root of 40, square root of m to the 4th, and square root of n to the 3rd. I take the square root of 40, and I get 2 square root 10. I can simplify square root of m to the 4th because m is an even number. So I do 4 divided by 2, and I get 2. And then square root of n to the 3rd, I need to break apart one more time because 3 is an odd number. So I break it up into square root of n to the 2nd power, and then square root of n. Square root of n to the 2nd power can be simplified because 2 is an even number, and it just becomes n1. All right, so now everything not under a square root, we write in the front. So 2m squared n1. And then everything that's still under a square root, we're going to put together under 1 square root. So the 10 and the n, since they're under a square root, I'm going to put them together. So it's going to be 2m squared n1 square root of 10n. Okay, you just put them together. So that concludes the notes for simplifying square roots.